Hello, my name is Ron Plutnicki, and I'm a member of Berlin's Senior Citizens Association. My wife and I live at Meadowbrook Village, which is a senior community just off of River Road West on your way towards Hudson Center. And we've been there for 20 years. I am a veteran. In October of 1958, I entered the Navy's Officer Candidate School at Newport, Rhode Island. And I went through a series of training there. Upon the completion of those 3 months, I was then transferred to Port Hueneme, California for additional training. And at the end of March of 1959, I was commissioned an ensign in the United States Naval Reserve with the designation Civil Engineering Corps. And that is the officer arm of the Navy's Construction Battalion. You may better know them as John Wayne's Seabees.
From the shores of the Pacific to the Arctic, from the coasts of Europe to the distant strands of Asia, we build for the fighters. We fight for what we build.
Early in April, I was sent to Naval Air Station South Weymouth, Massachusetts, and spent 3 years there as the Assistant Public Works Officer. At the conclusion of that assignment, I remained in the Naval Reserve as an active reservist. And it was early in 1968 that I left the military service. Now that's my story, but I'm here today to talk to you about and to tell you the story of Alan Johnson, a World War II veteran who recently died in June. Alan was a dear friend, a neighbor. He lived diagonally across the street from me, and he was a beloved member of our little community. During the springtime, the summer, and the fall, Alan spent much time at the beginning of his driveway in his favorite lawn chair with an extra lawn chair. And what he would like to do is anybody that was out walking and needed a rest, he would invite them to sit down with him and talk. A few years back, my wife and I took a cruise down the Danube River from Nuremberg, Germany to Budapest, Hungary. And Alan knew about the trip, so one afternoon he invited me to sit down with him and to tell him all about it. I took him on a trip from Germany through the Czech Republic to Austria, on to Hungary. And then told him about the highlight of our trip, and that was seeing Budapest at night. Budapest is a city that is divided in half by the Danube River. On the westerly side is Pest, which is all lowland. On the other side, Buda is hilly country. We took a tour at night. Part of the tour took us to the hillside in Buda, where we could view the Danube River and the many bridges that cross the Danube to unite the two sides of the city. This was supposed to be an hour tour. It ended up 2.5 hours. Our guide was a young Hungarian into history. And on the last point, we were at this hilltop. It was the site of an old Roman fort. And he said, well, if you were here in the fall and the winter of 1944, you would be standing amongst the German army and their heavy artillery. And they were facing the other side across the river, and that was Pest, and there was the Russian army. I took Alan through this trip, and he said to me that, Ron, if you were at that spot on December 26, 1944, you would have seen my plane flying over the river, trying to find a place to land. So at that time, I felt I was going to hear the story of veteran Alan Johnson. A few years ago, on a summer day, he told me his story. In 1942, Alan completed a program in horticulture at the Stockbridge School of Agriculture, the University of Massachusetts. And in early 1943, Alan was commissioned a lieutenant in the Army Air Corps. He was assigned to a bomber squadron that found its way to Italy and did bombing runs over Germany and Poland. Alan was a bombardier, and on the 26th of December 1944, he was going on his 23rd mission. That day, his plane was placed in the lead position of that bombing squadron. When they reached Poland, they were hit by ground fire, and there was severe damage to his plane. They released their bomb load and headed back to base in Italy. But the damage was so great, the pilot indicated to his crew that they would never make it back to Italy. They crash landed behind the lines of the Russian front. The nose of the plane was crushed. The pilot, co-pilot, navigator, engineer, and a crewman all died. Alan was saved when 3 of the remaining enlisted men pulled him from the crash. He then spent 3 months in a Russian military hospital, and in early 1945, he was discharged from the service. Alan returned home, married, raised a family of 3 children. He and his wife, Kay, built greenhouses, and he sold flowers for some 25 years. After hearing Alan's story, I wanted to do a lot more searching of my generation and their service in the military. So now I've got a few stories of my relatives. In the period of April, May, June, July 1945, I had 3 uncles serving in the Navy who were partaking in the final battle of the Pacific, the invasion of Okinawa. My uncle, Wilfred Sweeney, my mother's brother, was assigned to the USS Luce, a destroyer. They were blockading the island of Okinawa. On that day, the USS Luce was hit by 4 Japanese suicide planes. The ship went down, my uncle went down with him. On March 5th of 1945, Wilfred Sweeney turned 21. On May 5th, 1945, he went down with the USS Luce. I've done a lot of research. I didn't have to go too far for information on my uncle Wilfred Sweeney. This is his picture, and this is a picture of me with him. It was probably the last time I saw him. You can't see what's in my hand, but it was a gift from him. It was a framework of a Japanese fighter pilot, what they called the Zero. I learned a lot more about my uncle when my youngest son, found this book, and this is the story of the USS Luce. From its day of commissioning to the battles that it fought in the Aleutian Islands near Alaska, through the Philippines till it reached the Bay of Okinawa. In this book, I found the battle station of my uncle, and I found out where he was the day that the USS Luce was hit by suicide planes. I know exactly where he was on that day. It was in the 3rd turret in the stern of the ship. I can remember the day very clearly that a shipmate of his came to my grandmother's house to tell my grandmother that her son was a good shipmate, was a good warrior, and he did not suffer the day he was killed. This is Wilfred's flag. I can remember very clearly the day we had a funeral ceremony for him. The casket naturally was empty, but that was the flag that draped the casket. My grandmother gave me this flag. I carried it home that day to her house, and after I finished my military service, she gave me this flag, and I've had it since encased. 2020 is the 75th anniversary of my uncle's loss at sea. In March of 2019, my aunt, his sister, died. In going through the things that she had, I found 5 medals, and I assumed that these 5 medals were Willie's medals. So I brought the medals to a trophy store in Northborough. I told the story to the owner. He was able to find a picture of the USS Luce. He had the insignia that my uncle wore, ship's cook second class. He found a Navy emblem, and he mounted the 5 medals. So I hope to keep my uncle's memory alive with this plaque. I also had another uncle, my father's brother, who participated in that final battle of the Pacific. Frank Plutnicki was assigned to the USS Rankin, which was an attack supply ship. During a 17-day period, that vessel was attacked 100 times by Japanese suicide planes. The Rankin survived, my uncle survived. Also, I had an uncle married to one of my father's sisters. He was stationed on the USS Missouri, which was the largest battleship in the American fleet at that time. And that vessel was there to bombard the shores of Okinawa. Once the troops landed, that vessel went back to port and resupplied to be ready for the invasion of Japan. But that never happened because the atomic bombs were dropped and the Japanese surrendered. The USS Missouri returned to Tokyo Harbor, and on that vessel, the Japanese military command came aboard and signed the surrender papers. During that time, I also had a cousin who was a POW in Japan. Albert Poussard was in the army stationed in the Philippines when the Japanese attacked the Philippines. He did not surrender at Bataan. He went into the jungles with the Philippine soldiers and fought a guerrilla warfare, but subsequently was captured, spent time POW camps, and then was transferred to Japan to work as a slave laborer in the coal mines of Japan. Albert survived and had a wonderful life after that. While searching for more information on relatives that have served in the military, I found a little scrapbook my mother kept, and out of it fell a newspaper article ready to disintegrate. But I was able to get the date and the paper's name. The News, Wednesday, October the 26th, 1898. This article describes the funeral march of one John Sweeney of Company B8, Massachusetts Regiment, USV, the United States Volunteers. John Sweeney is my great-grandfather who fought in the Spanish-American War. And in the article, it says how they marched past the home where his son was living, and that son, William, would be my grandfather, who I never met, died before I was born. I also found another article about a wounded Marine corporal, Wilfred J. DeMille, a cousin. He was a Marine serving in China. He was wounded in a skirmish in Shanghai, was sent back to the United States to recuperate, had several operations over a span of 14 months, and he died sometime in 1934. I had a cousin that told me that if you want to do research, the U.S. Navy Memorial in Washington, D.C. has a Navy log which categorizes every Navy man who wants to be in the log, whether it be in the Navy or the Marines. Rainey Poussard is a cousin, and he told me about the Navy log. I went on the Navy log, I found his story. I also found the story of his father, my great-uncle, who served in the Navy from 1902 to 1906, and his last assignment was teaching midshipmen in Annapolis. My senior year in high school, I had applied to the Naval Academy, but I was told that I had just turned 17 and I was too young. Wait a year and come back, and I decided not to do that. I went on to Northeastern University. What I've done is I put my uncle's story in the Navy log. I've put my story in the Navy log. And I've got more uncles and cousins that I want to put in the Navy log. I've given you a few stories of lives and histories of veterans. It would be an exciting experience for you if you did the same thing. Try to find out the lives of veterans in your family. I feel that when we do this research, we honor the veterans and we respect the veterans. I believe every man or woman who puts on a military uniform, whether they serve 6 months, 3 or 4 years, or a career of 20 or more, deserves honor and respect. When we respect the name veteran, we respect the person who earned that name.
The enemy struck at Pearl Harbor, the whole of America's mighty productive machinery was thrown into high gear to place the country on a full war footing. The Congress quickly enacted legislation providing for the greatest construction program in the history of the world. Almost overnight, the Bureau of Yards and Docks of the Navy Department became a billion-dollar concern. Recognizing the need for an organization of skilled workers to build advanced bases in active theaters of war, the Bureau of Yards and Docks obtained authority for the establishment of the 1st Naval Construction Battalion in charge of officers of the Civil Engineer Corps of the Navy. From this 1st Battalion of 1,100 officers and men, the personnel of the Seabees increased with the demands of war to 3,300, 10,000, 30,000, until at the present time, the total authorized strength is 222 active battalions with approximately 290,000 officers and men. It is difficult to put into words a full account of their services to the fighting forces, but I feel sure that this tour of CB activities, as seen through the eyes of the motion picture camera, will justify our confidence in this youngest member of the great Navy family, whose motto, construimus batuimus, we build, we fight, is translated into action in the film you are about to see.
Not in 7 easy lessons, but in 8 tough weeks, the Navy teaches the civilian craftsman to be a fighting builder. Thousands of individual workers, now forged into one great military organization, pass in review with their motorized weapons, infused with the CB spirit. We build, we fight. CBs of the Navy, we can build and we can fight. We'll pave our way. Ready to build and defend advanced bases from the Arctic to the tropics, a new battalion leaves the training camp at the amazing rate of 1 every other day. And we promise that we'll remember American workmen, defenseless no longer, shoving off for battle stations. Destination for this CB battalion is strategic Dutch Harbor, the first big stepping stone on the road to Adak, Kiska, Attu, an American reoccupation of the Aleutian chain, so vital to our offensive strategy in the North Pacific. Towering snow-capped mountains rising from the sea make this great arsenal of the North one of the most impressive sights in the Western Hemisphere. But the Seabees haven't come to admire the scenery. They've come to change it. The iron jaws of the steam shovels bite into the fallen mountainside. Bulldozers, heavy tanks of construction, level roads where only walls of earth had stood before. In weather so cold that concrete has to be heated before it can be poured, the Seabees are on the job, laying foundations for gun emplacements. Oil tanks, storehouses, concrete foundations on which victory will be built. The fine art of logistics, a big word for the big job of getting the right thing to the right place at the right time, made it necessary for the Seabees to bring their own lumber yard with them. And lumber plus Seabees quickly adds up to an imposing total of barracks, hospitals, shipyards, warehouses. A modern advanced base built to withstand the most savage attacks of nature as well as the enemy. A naval base thoroughly equipped to supply and serve the planes and ships that were gathering for a great offensive in the north. No longer would warships damaged in action have to creep back to Seattle for necessary repairs. When the Seabees promised to have this destroyer out to sea in 36 hours, the skipper said it couldn't be done. But the Seabees' answer became a famous slogan: "Can do." 36 hours later, the destroyer was rejoining her task force, and a jubilant skipper was expressing his gratitude to the Seabees in an official commendation. In all my experience with shipyards, I have never seen such tireless energy. In spite of suggestions that the Seabees be relieved for rest, many of them worked 36 hours straight until the job was done. That's how the Seabees became a legend in the Aleutians. That's how victory was made inevitable at Attu. And buildings shipped in prefabricated sections that fit together like parts of a jigsaw puzzle. But a puzzle that Seabees solve with lightning speed. For working in perfect teamwork, they shave a few precious minutes off their own record for setting up this unit. A good-sized, modern, and substantial hospital in 5 hours. In the States, gas stations may be opening late and closing early, but the Attu service station does business 24 hours a day. Transforming this barren little island into a flourishing base was a 24-hour-a-day job. Or, as the Seabees like to put it, a 36-hour-a-day job. The Seabees put Midway back on the map. At Pearl Harbor, officers of the Civil Engineer Corps assisted in the salvaging of ships that had been irreparably lost, according to the Japanese press. A strange name in the far-off Solomons became a household word: Guadalcanal. With possession of Henderson Field, conclusion jumpers were congratulating each other on our domination of the South Pacific. For after all, wasn't Henderson Field the key to the Solomons? Yes, we had wrested a key from the Japs that was going to open some mighty important doors. But before that key could turn a single lock, it was badly in need of repair. The Seabees, digging into that airfield with the same fighting spirit as the Marines had hit the beach, repaired 53 shell and bomb craters in 48 hours. That would be a record in any league, but the Seabees hung up their record under fire. When Congressman Moss of Minnesota saw the Seabees in action at Guadal, he reported, "When Jap attacks were made, I saw Seabees working on Henderson Field drop their tools, pick up their rifles, and fight side by side with the Marines. When the attack was over, the Seabees put down their guns, picked up their tools, and calmly went back to work again." How many headline readers appreciate the far-sighted construction program that lies behind those banner lines? First to hit the beach and the last to leave, the Seabees are the cleanup men who salvage the wrecked ships and splintered causeways that are left in the wake of every invasion. This is beachcombing on a grand scale, for putting twisted steel and charred wood back to work again saves millions of dollars for Uncle Sam. Our motorized divisions roll along the main streets of Sicilian towns as safely as they cross the pontoon causeways. With Sicily secured as an Allied base, a new D-Day looms up, the most daring and significant D-Day of World War II, the first Allied invasion of Fortress Europe. Now, plans so carefully laid at the Casablanca Conference months before are ready to be translated into violent and victorious reality. As they approached the coast of Italy, they were constantly meeting up with other convoys until the sea was completely covered with ships, converging through the smokescreen on the Bay of Salerno. LSTs were loaded with bulldozers, tractors, and other CB as well as infantry equipment. The sea was calm and beautiful. But that was only the lull before the storm, the most terrible man-made storm that was ever seen. The commandos, Rangers, and Seabees in the first wave were a perfect target for Nazi artillery, firing on them from the hills. But they held on. Sudden death was in the air and hidden in the sea. One of the first pontoons dropped over the side hit a mine before it could leave the LST. There were 35 Seabees on that pontoon. A bathing beach where fun-loving Italians used to sun themselves on peaceful days was soaked in blood. When you're in the spot our boys were in that night, it helps to feel that gun in your hand and to know you can return blow for blow. But those Seabees responsible for setting up the beachheads, marking off the spaces for the LSTs and LCIs to come in, and directing the traffic that had to drive onto the beach in the face of that terrible enemy fire, they just had to stand there and take it. The Seabees fought every chance they got, but there were thousands to do the fighting, and not enough to do those dirty jobs on the beach, without which our forces would never get ashore. Cutting through the wreckage of trucks and tanks that had been crushed by German firepower into a wall of twisted molten metal, the bulldozers cleared the way for powerful General Sherman's. While the battle raged, the Seabees threw up impromptu storage houses for ammunition and equipment, and dressing stations for the wounded, where men who would have bled to death could be treated in time to bring them back to life and to their homes again. First, inch by inch, then foot by foot, and finally yard by yard, our troops fought their way up the beach, now littered with broken machines and broken men. While the Seabees, with weary muscles but iron wills, went on unloading supplies until that bloody beachhead began to look like a naval landing base. There has seldom been so much courage in one place as on that beach at Salerno, from the lowest buck private to General Clark. But the Seabees were the unsung heroes of Salerno. And as the armies of democracy drive north on the road to Naples, Rome, and further on, Berlin, every man who took his chances on the shore that night could tell you, if we ever go into action as hot as those bloody days of Salerno, I hope to God the Seabees are there with us.
There are great works ahead for the Seabees. The nation is building for victory. And no matter what the difficulties involved, we must and will obtain it. There is a place in the Seabees for every fighting and working American, regardless of race, creed, or color, who has a stout heart, able hands, and the will to win. We have shown you in part some of the things accomplished by the Seabees. We are proud of them. We look to the future with complete confidence in our ability to perform all those tasks which may be imposed upon us by our Commander-in-Chief. With that spirit, we will win.